I'm a neurologist. Over 15 years of working at major hospitals in California, I've been on countless night shifts in emergency rooms, witnessing hundreds of stroke cases from mild to severe, from those who recovered to those who could never speak again. But there was one moment that left me standing still. Not because the case was too complicated, but because it happened to someone who had no reason to suffer a stroke at all. His name was Richard Hall, 68 years old, living in a quiet suburban area of Sacramento. He had just retired 3 months earlier after 35 years working in logistics. A decent, disciplined, calm American man. Mr. Richard didn't smoke, didn't drink, ate consistently. Every morning, he brewed his black coffee, read the Sacramento Bee on the porch, with his dog Buddy lying at his feet. At noon, he gardened. In the evening, he watched the news and FaceTimed his son who lives in Houston. They were a typical American family, close-knit, simple, never flashy. That day was an early spring Tuesday. No rain, clear sky. Mr. Richard had just finished dinner with his wife, grilled salmon with lemon sauce, baby spinach salad, and a glass of unsweetened grape juice. Everything was proper. Everything was healthy. About 15 minutes later, while washing his hands in the kitchen, he suddenly leaned on the chair and collapsed. The sound of his body falling onto the hardwood floor echoed in the eerie silence. Mrs. Susan, his wife, ran over, thinking he slipped. But when she tried to wake him, calling his name again and again, he didn't respond. His right arm hung down, his face began to droop. His eyes no longer focused. His 9-year-old grandson standing in the living room asked in panic, "Grandma, what's wrong with Grandpa?" I was the doctor on duty that night. When I got the call through 911, I went immediately. In the ambulance, he was still conscious but couldn't speak. Couldn't signal. Couldn't move the right side of his body anymore. At the ER, through CT and MRI, I confirmed, Mr. Richard had a blockage in the left middle cerebral artery, the area controlling speech and movement. We intervened urgently, administering clot-dissolving medication. But more than 45 minutes had passed since onset, and for brain cells, that's already a dead zone. After transferring him to the ICU, I stepped outside to meet Mrs. Susan. She was sitting in the hallway, both hands clenched together. When she saw me, she simply asked, her voice trembling, "He was just fixing the backyard fence this morning. And now he can't move, doctor?" I didn't know what to say except to help keep her calm. But inside, I was choked up. I knew Mr. Richard would survive. But starting tomorrow, he would have to relearn how to hold a spoon, put on a shirt, get up from bed. And more heartbreaking, he would no longer be able to say the thing he meant to tell his son on the phone that night. After that shift, I didn't go home right away. I stayed in my office thinking about what had just happened. A healthy man. No underlying condition. Clean diet. Disciplined routine. So why did he have a stroke? And then the question popped into my head, could it be that one small thing at dinner, even a piece of fruit, made the difference between someone living well and someone in a wheelchair for the rest of their life? I wasn't looking for a miracle. But I began combing through every piece of medical research ever studied. And then, I came across something truly worth sharing with you, especially if you're over 60. A type of fruit small, but capable of creating a different tomorrow. Not a pill. Not a machine. Just one small habit, practiced regularly enough to protect the blood vessels, quietly nourishing the brain every day. Mr. Richard Hall, I still remember his face clearly that morning. At 8 a.m., after a night in the ICU, he opened his eyes. But the look in them had changed. His left eye was silent, his right eye no longer coordinated. He was still conscious, I knew that. But he couldn't speak. I walked in, sat at the edge of the bed, and gently called, "Mr. Richard. Can you hear me?" He blinked once. His right hand didn't move. His left hand tried to rise as if to write something in the air, but all of it was just a weary effort. The part of his brain that was damaged was the speech motor center, the place that connects thoughts to spoken words. Medically, he had suffered an ischemic stroke in the Broca's area, due to a blockage in the left middle cerebral artery, a left MCA infarct. In real-life terms, he could no longer say what he was thinking. He couldn't tell his wife he was hungry. He couldn't ask his granddaughter how her day at school went. He was still thinking. But all the words in his head were now locked in a room with no door. I saw Mrs. Susan, his wife, again in the hospital hallway. She was sitting in a quiet corner, wearing a charcoal gray knitted sweater, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. She wasn't crying. Just silent. I asked, the night before it happened, "Did your husband show any unusual signs?" She shook her head. "No, doctor. He was very healthy. Walked the dog in the morning. Watched the news in the afternoon. Had salmon and salad for dinner like always. Nothing was different." I stood still. Every word she spoke felt like a knock against the big question in my mind: why did this happen? The nature of stroke is a sudden blockage of a small blood vessel in the brain, and the outcome depends on where and how long the blockage lasts. But more importantly, 90% of strokes can be prevented if we recognize the silent risk factors early enough. In Mr. Richard's case, I reviewed his diet. He ate fruit after dinner, red grapes and ripe peaches, drank a glass of almond milk with honey, ate late around 7:45 p.m., did not move after eating, went to bed right after. Medically, that is the perfect storm for blood sugar spikes, increased insulin, inflammation of the blood vessel lining, and the formation of micro blood clots. No one taught him this. No doctor had ever asked him about the timing of his fruit intake. And like many older adults in America, he believed, "I don't smoke. I walk. I eat fruit every day, I'm fine." But fine is not on the surface. It lies deep inside the blood vessels, where micro changes happen silently, every day, without symptoms. 3 days later, he was transferred to a rehabilitation center. He still couldn't speak. But he blinked and nodded when I greeted him. Mrs. Susan held his hand throughout physical therapy. They didn't say anything to each other. But I knew, between them, there was a sadness that language could no longer describe. On the dining table in his hospital room, I saw an old notebook with scribbled handwriting. Someone had written, "Each morning is a chance to live better than the day before." I walked into the hallway. And I told myself, if someone like Mr. Richard could collapse after a single meal, then maybe I need to do something to make sure this story doesn't repeat. Not with medication, but through sharing. Through simple, clear knowledge. And through tiny habits, starting with a fruit that seems harmless. During the same week Mr. Richard was hospitalized, I had a routine checkup scheduled with Mrs. Margaret Collins, 73 years old, living in Santa Rosa, a peaceful town in Northern California, where maple trees change their colors in the fall, and retirees often take morning walks through quiet neighborhoods. Mrs. Margaret lives alone. Her husband passed away 7 years ago. Her 2 children settled in Florida and Oregon. They call weekly, but they don't live nearby. She doesn't live in a nursing home. She lives in her own small house, with a wooden porch, 2 pots of lavender, and a white rocking chair. Every morning, she walks the neighborhood for 15 minutes, accompanied by her dog Sam, a poodle now 11 years old. When she walked into the clinic, she smiled, walked slowly but upright, and carried a floral embroidered fabric bag she had sewn herself. She greeted me warmly, "Good morning, doctor. It's been 6 months already, huh?" I invited her to sit and began the usual check-up: blood pressure, heart rate, memory, reflexes. All her numbers were better than expected for someone at 73. No hypertension. No high cholesterol. Clear memory. Quick reflexes. Deep sleep. No medications except a small dose of vitamin D each morning. I looked at her, curious, and asked, "How do you keep such good health and mental clarity?" She smiled gently, lowered her eyes a bit, and said, "I don't have any big secret, doctor. Just that every afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I eat a few blueberries. About 10 berries only." I was surprised not because she ate blueberries, but because she did it with such intention, such discipline, like a personal ritual. I asked, "Why blueberries? And why 3 p.m.? She replied, "I once read in a magazine for seniors that blueberries are good for memory. Back then I used to forget names, so I tried it. I chose 3 o'clock because that's when I usually feel sleepy. Eating something cool and fresh wakes me up, and then I go for a 10-minute walk." She paused for a moment and added, "I don't think it's magic. But my head feels lighter. I don't feel irritable. I sleep better. And I don't feel lonely." That last sentence stopped me in my tracks. In all my years as a doctor, I've heard hundreds of people talk about medicine. But rarely has anyone spoken about a piece of fruit the way she spoke of it, as if it were a companion, a quiet friend like Mrs. Margaret just had. I asked her, "How long have you kept that habit?" She replied, 8 years. I buy them from Trader Joe's, the organic kind. Keep them in a small container. Every time, I take just 1 handful. No mixing. No sugar. Just blueberries. That's enough. After the checkup, I stood by the door and watched her leave. That same slow, steady walk. Cream-colored cardigan. Holding Sam's leash. The wind played softly in her hair. Her steps weren't rushed. But they were firm. And I thought, if someone ever asked me, "What does healthy aging look like in America?" perhaps I'd tell them about Mrs. Margaret. Not because she's extraordinary, but because she's mastered the simplest thing in the most consistent way. A handful of blueberries every afternoon, a gentle message that she still loves herself, in the wisest, quietest way possible. When Mrs. Margaret told me she ate blueberries every afternoon and felt her head lighter, I smiled. Not because her story sounded naive, but because she was doing something that modern science has clearly proven to be effective. In all my years as a neurologist, I've learned that what we put into our bodies each day can matter just as much, if not more, than the medications we take. And if I were to choose just one fruit to recommend for older adults to eat daily, it would be blueberries. Why are blueberries so special? The natural deep purple-blue color of blueberries comes from a plant compound called anthocyanin. Anthocyanin is a powerful antioxidant that helps relax blood vessel walls and supports blood flow to the brain. It also helps fight silent inflammation within the blood vessels, reduces plaque buildup, and lowers the risk of forming tiny clots. Moreover, anthocyanin has been shown to support memory and focus in people over the age of 60. What's fascinating is that anthocyanin can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and reach sensitive areas in the brain, gently supporting the regeneration of nerve cells. And science has confirmed this. A Harvard University study that followed over 93,000 women for 18 years showed that those who ate blueberries and strawberries at least 3 times a week had a 32% lower risk of stroke. Another study from the University of Reading in the UK found that just 1 cup of blueberries a day for 12 weeks helped adults aged 60 to 75 improve memory, speed up information processing, and lower blood pressure. But I haven't just seen this in textbooks. I see it in my clinic every day. When a patient starts with one small habit, they often end up changing the course of their entire future. So how much is enough, and what's the right way to eat them? 10 to 15 berries a day is just right for older adults. The best time to eat them is in the afternoon between 2:30 and 4 p.m. They're best eaten when the stomach isn't too empty, or about an hour after lunch. They can be fresh or frozen. If you make juice, don't add sugar or mix them with cream. No need to be fancy. Just be consistent. And eat them as an act of kindness to yourself. Some people have asked me, I'm on blood pressure medication, can I still eat blueberries? The answer is, blueberries are generally safe with most chronic medications. Just be sure to eat them at least 1 hour apart from your meds. Why is all this so important? Because the brain's blood vessels in older adults are fragile. They can become silently inflamed or damaged over the years without showing clear symptoms. And by the time you start forgetting names, speaking slower, or feeling dizzy, it may already be a sign that your brain's blood flow is weakening. Instead of waiting until it becomes an emergency, we can start protecting ourselves today. Just by adding a small handful of blueberries to your afternoon. No prescriptions. No huge costs. Just a bit of awareness. And one simple habit. Repeated with enough love and intention. Just like Mrs. Margaret, no reminders, no pressure. Every afternoon, she quietly opens her fridge, takes out a small container, eats 10 blueberries. And treats it like a gentle promise to herself. I once treated an elderly gentleman named George Miller, 70 years old, living in Anaheim, California. He was a tall white American, often wore a knit hat even in summer, and had a habit of walking around his neighborhood early every morning. He lived with his wife, loved playing Sudoku, and took care of the orange tree in his backyard. During one of his routine checkups, I asked him about his diet. He smiled confidently and said, "I eat fruit really well, doctor. Every single day. Mangoes, red grapes, peaches, melons. I always have a full bowl after dinner." I didn't want to ruin his enthusiasm. I just gently asked, "What time do you usually eat fruit?" He replied, "Around 8 p.m. after dinner with my wife, I sit down, watch the news, snack on fruit, and sip sweet tea." At first glance, it sounds healthy. But that exact routine, seemingly harmless, was actually a silent risk factor for his brain's blood vessels. This is a common misconception among older adults in the US. They believe, fruit is healthy, the sweeter the better, and eating fruit means they're doing great. But the truth is, not all fruit is good for brain circulation, especially after age 60. Fruits like ripe mangoes, red grapes, overly ripe bananas, and sweet peaches, though delicious, contain a lot of natural sugar. When eaten at night, after a full dinner, especially when the body is less active, these can spike blood sugar and trigger mild inflammation in the vessel walls. Every time that happens, the brain's blood vessels weaken a little more. Eventually, one fragile spot may clot or burst, and stroke strikes like a broken bridge across a stream of blood. Another mistake is mixing fruit with condensed milk, sugary yogurt, honey, or ice cream. I've seen many older adults buy those pre-mixed fruit bowls at the store looking healthy, but really sugar bombs. Some people juice their fruit every morning: 3 oranges, an apple, half a banana. The drink might feel refreshing, but it's all sugar, no more fiber. Others eat fruit very late, right before bed, thinking, fruit for dinner is lighter. But when sweet fruit enters the stomach late at night, when blood vessels are meant to rest, the body must work harder to process the sugar. That puts extra pressure on the heart and brain, increases nighttime blood pressure, and from there comes a chain of risk: stroke or brain incidents during sleep. Mr. George was a clear example. After several months of eating sweet fruit every night, he began to feel dizzy when standing, had trouble sleeping, and experienced unstable morning blood pressure. Tests revealed plaque buildup in his carotid artery. And he had no idea it came from those mango slices and bowls of grapes he ate nightly. When I gently explained it to him, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "I thought I was doing everything right. Turns out, I was feeding disease while thinking I was living healthy. I didn't blame him. Because so many people are just like him. No one taught them how to choose fruit that suits aging bodies. No one said timing matters. And no one explained that even fruit has a dark side. After that, Mr. George made a change. He switched to blueberries, raspberries, and pomegranate eaten in the afternoon, never too late. 3 weeks later, he came in for a follow-up. In his hand was a small box of blueberries. And he told me something I'll never forget: my brain deserves to be fed better. If you eat fruit every day, I'm not telling you to stop. I just hope you'll understand it better. Because sometimes, the difference between being healthy and having a stroke isn't whether or not you eat fruit, but which fruit, when you eat it, and what you eat it with. And just by changing those things, you've already taken a big step toward protecting the blood vessels in your brain. One early spring afternoon, I received a phone call from Mrs. Evelyn Parker, 75 years old, living in Fresno, California. She was a former patient of mine who had been treated for high blood pressure and cholesterol for many years and now lived alone after her husband passed away. She spoke clearly, calmly, and politely. She said, "Hello doctor, I watched your video about blueberries. I just have a small question. I'm taking heart medication and blood thinners. Should I be eating blueberries every day?" Her question warmed my heart. Not because it was something new, but because she was doing something very few older adults do. She didn't decide on her own. She asked. And that was the first step toward a safe and mindful change. I told her, and I want to tell all of you, that there is no one-size-fits-all formula. Each body is its own universe. And choosing the right fruit is part of respecting yourself. If you're taking heart medications, blood thinners, or blood pressure pills, blueberries are still a safe option. Just eat them at least an hour apart from your medication to avoid interfering with absorption or effectiveness. If you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, choose blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, or fresh pomegranate. These fruits have a low glycemic index and won't spike your blood sugar suddenly. If you have digestive issues or frequent bloating, you can steam the blueberries lightly or make a gentle juice. Just remember, no added sugar, condensed milk, or honey. If you live in a place where it's hard to find fresh blueberries, like a rural or colder area, opt for frozen or unsweetened dried blueberries. In the US, you can easily find them at Costco, Trader Joe's, Walmart, or online supermarkets. Even if you can't eat blueberries every day, just 3 to 4 times a week is enough to bring noticeable benefits to memory, blood pressure, and brain health. An uncle I know who lives in Montana, where winters are harsh and fresh produce is scarce, can't get blueberries year-round. But every summer, he stocks up on frozen blueberries for 3 months. He eats them 3 times a week, consistently, as part of his routine. As a result, his blood pressure stabilizes, he sleeps better, and he no longer forgets his grandkids' names like before. I once heard another elderly woman say, "I live on Medicare. I can't afford to eat like other people. I only buy fruit from the discount section." I replied, "That's perfectly fine. What matters isn't how expensive the fruit is. What matters is that you know what your body needs and you start from the smallest step within your means. No one needs to be like anyone else. There's no single fruit that works for everyone. But there is one principle I always remind my patients: your body is your most reliable guide. If you eat something and feel light, sleep well, and think clearly, that's a good sign. If you feel bloated, sluggish, or tired afterward, that's a cue to make a change. And most importantly, never feel like a burden just because you can't follow some plan from the internet or a book. You only need to listen to your body and stay gentle and patient with yourself every day. Just like Mrs. Evelyn did after that phone call. 3 weeks later, she called again. "Doctor, I started with 7 blueberries a day. I didn't feel a huge difference. But I sleep better now. And I haven't forgotten my medication schedule. I smiled and said, "That means you've already started treating yourself kindly." If you're wondering whether this habit is right for you, remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just need to be someone who cares for your body in the gentlest way possible. If you remember, we began this video with a story that made me as a neurologist stand in silence. A healthy man, Mr. Richard Hall, 68 years old, collapsed to the floor after dinner without any warning signs. From someone who tended his garden daily, he became a man who had to relearn how to hold a spoon, write his name, and call out to his loved ones. That story wasn't meant to scare you. It was a reminder that sometimes, it's the things that seem harmless that quietly lead us toward a turning point we can't return from. But we also met someone else, Mrs. Margaret from Santa Rosa. A woman living alone, with no supplements, no special devices. Just a small container of blueberries in her fridge, a quiet routine every afternoon, and a silent resolve to keep her mind clear. Not just for herself but so her children wouldn't have to worry. 2 people. In the same America. At the same age. But with 2 entirely different paths. The difference didn't come from money. Not from genetics. It came from a small habit, repeated long enough with awareness and love. A handful of blueberries each day won't make you immortal. But it can help you sleep better, remember more clearly, finish a sentence to someone you love, and stay mentally present for one more day. Old age is not the final chapter. It's a slower melody but still beautiful, and it deserves to be played with care and respect. If you're still wondering, where should I begin? I would say begin with your body. Begin this very afternoon. And begin with one small act, choose the right fruit for your brain. If anything I've shared today has resonated with you, I ask one thing, click the like button so the algorithm knows that older people deserve care too. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply the name of the fruit you eat each day. And if you believe this might help a friend, a loved one, or someone living alone like Mrs. Margaret, please share this video. Because who knows, someone's healthy spring might begin with a single reminder from you. About a box of blueberries. I am a neurologist. But today, I simply want to be a friend, leaving you with one message: you deserve to live clearly, consciously, and fully until the very last days of your life. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And if you're still listening, maybe this message was meant for you.